My grandfather never spoke about that night for more than 40 years. Whenever anyone mentioned the old cremation ground, he would immediately change the subject and leave the room. But shortly before he died, he finally told our family what had happened there. According to him, one man vanished without a trace. A dead body moved on its own from a burning funeral pyre, and something in the darkness spent the entire night watching them. By sunrise, everyone who survived swore they would never return to that place again. And after hearing his story, I understood exactly why. Tonight, I'm going to tell you what happened in that cremation ground more than 60 years ago. Hello everyone. This incident took place at a cremation ground while a body was being cremated according to Hindu traditions. Today's incident was sent to me through email by a friend from India. I am narrating it to you exactly the way my friend wrote it. This incident happened to someone from my own family. My grandfather had two elder brothers. Among them, the eldest was Shyamal Grandpa. Many years ago, a strange experience happened to him on a mysterious night involving a cremation ground and a group of people, along with certain events whose explanation is still not clear today. Many years later, Shyamal Grandpa told the story of that night to his own grandson. Later, I heard the incident for the first time from that grandson. After hearing it, I felt that it was not just a horror story, but rather a family memory that has been passed down from generation to generation. There are several reasons why this incident feels even more real to me. About 25 years ago, when my own grandfather passed away, I also went to that same cremation ground. At that time, there was no electric furnace there. Everything was done on wooden funeral pyres. After experiencing the atmosphere of that place, the smell of burnt wood, and the deep silence, it became very easy for me to imagine how much more isolated, dark, and terrifying that place must have been more than 60 years ago. For your convenience, I am writing the incident in my grandfather's own words. Bird 1, 60 years ago. What was called a town back then was limited to only a handful of areas. The rest consisted of mango orchards, forests, and narrow dirt roads. My grandfather Shyamal was a strong young man at that time. The most respected elderly person in our neighborhood was Nibaran Chakraborty. He was in his 80s and was a powerful and influential man. One afternoon, while sitting on an easy chair on his veranda, Nibaran Babu suddenly breathed his last. Nibaran Babu had 3 sons. The eldest son, Abhinash Babu, and the youngest lived in Burdwan. But the middle son lived in Asansol, where he worked for the railways. There were no mobile phones or telephones in those days. A quick-witted boy from the neighborhood was sent to the railway station on a bicycle to deliver the news. He boarded a passenger train to Asansol, informed Nibaran Babu's middle son, and then returned to Burdwan with him on the evening train. By the time they returned, darkness had already begun to fall across the sky. The funeral rites could not begin until the middle son arrived. Nibaran Babu's body was laid on a cot, but one finger on his right hand seemed to tremble again and again. The women of the neighborhood whispered among themselves in fear. Oh my, it feels as though the old man wants to say something. Is he searching for someone? Nibaran Babu's half-open eyes seemed fixed on the doorway. One of his relatives broke down crying and said, "What an ominous death. It feels as though his soul is still struggling to leave, as if some attachment or unfinished desire is keeping him here."
When everything was finally arranged and the young men of the neighborhood lifted the cot onto their shoulders, they began chanting, "Bol, Hari Hari Bol." It was around 8 o'clock at night. My grandfather was one of the men carrying the cot. The cremation ground was located quite far from the town in a deserted area. The road leading there was frightening. Dense forest stood on both sides with only a narrow brick road running through the middle. Grandfather and 7 others carried Nibaran Babu's body on their shoulders and started walking toward the cremation ground. Grandfather used to say that the air felt different that night. There were no sounds of crickets anywhere. The only sounds were their footsteps and the creaking noise of the bamboo bier. At that time, only a few electric poles had been installed in the town, but the closer they moved toward the cremation ground, the more the darkness seemed to swallow them. Everyone carried a bamboo stick in their hands. For the entire group, there were only 2 large hurricane lanterns and a few flashlights. By the time they reached the cremation ground, it was nearly 10 o'clock at night. Unlike today, there were no walls surrounding the cremation ground. There was no gate either. All around stood enormous banyan and peepal trees whose branches stretched into the darkness like the skeletal arms of dead giants. From time to time, the distant cries of jackals echoed through the night. In one corner stood an old well. The water inside looked pitch black, drowned in darkness. Rotten leaves and debris floated on its surface. It looked as though nobody had gone near it for many years. The ground of the cremation area was covered with ashes, burnt wood, and charcoal. There were no electric or gas furnaces there. Large piles of dry logs and cow dung cakes had been stacked to one side for cremation purposes. It was a simple and traditional arrangement, just as it had been in the old days. As the men gathered wood to prepare the funeral pyre, a sudden wind began to blow. But the wind brought no comfort. Instead, it carried a rotten and foul smell. Strangely, no cremation had taken place there earlier that day. Suddenly, grandfather's friend Bimal whispered in alarm, "Look, doesn't Nibaran Babu's mouth seem slightly open?" Everyone immediately shined their flashlights toward the body. In the trembling light, they saw something disturbing. Although Nibaran Babu's jaw had been tightly tied shut with a white cloth, his mouth appeared to be slowly opening little by little. It looked as if he wanted to say something one final time. The sight made grandfather's chest tighten with fear. An old dom sat in one corner smoking a bidi. The red glow of the burning bidi flickered in the darkness. The old man muttered quietly, "Tonight is a great new moon night, Babus. Finish the cremation quickly and leave. The body feels unusually heavy." There was a strange warning hidden in his voice. It seemed as though he was talking about more than just the weight of the corpse. As the night grew deeper, the silence of the cremation ground became even more terrifying. When Nibaran Babu's lifeless body was finally placed upon the wooden pyre, it was already close to midnight. With no other option, water was fetched from that old well for the final rites. The water looked cloudy and black, like a dark mirror. Grandfather noticed that when Bimal approached the well, he suddenly froze in place. Grandfather whispered, "What happened, Bimal?" In a trembling voice, Bimal replied, "Shama, when I lowered the bucket into the well, it felt as though someone grabbed it from below and pulled it. And I think I saw a face inside the water." Grandfather tried to reassure him. "It's your imagination. In this darkness and lantern light, things can look strange." But even grandfather could feel fear beginning to pound inside his chest. Nibaran Babu's eldest son, Abhinash Babu, performed the ritual of lighting the pyre with shaking hands. Normally, dry wood should burst into flames immediately, but that night, the opposite happened. Even after ghee, incense, and camphor were added, the fire refused to burn properly. The flames turned an unusual bluish color, and a horrible odor spread through the air. It was far stronger and more unpleasant than the normal smell of cremation. The old dom, sitting beneath a nearby tree, shouted again, "Keep chanting the name of God, Babus. The wind is changing." Suddenly, everyone noticed something strange. One side of the funeral pyre seemed to be moving on its own. Several logs shifted by themselves. It looked as though Nibaran Babu was lying on the pyre in discomfort and trying to move. But that should have been impossible. The body should have already become stiff. And that was only the beginning of the horror.
The most terrifying experience came when grandfather and Heron grandpa tried to adjust the logs on the pyre. The fire had not fully caught yet. Only the lower portion of the pyre was burning steadily. Using a long bamboo pole, They tried to move the body slightly, but Grandfather was shocked by what he felt. The bamboo pole did not seem to touch soft flesh. Instead, it felt as though it was pressing against something as hard as stone. No matter how hard they pushed, the body did not move even an inch. How could a human body become that heavy? Haran Grandpa suddenly froze and whispered softly, "Shiamal." My arm feels numb. It feels like we're not alone near this pyre. At that exact moment, the flames suddenly rose higher. In the reddish-orange glow, something caught their attention. For a brief second, through a fold in the white cloth covering the body, it appeared as though another hand was emerging. The hand was unnaturally black. Its fingers were abnormally long. It seemed to be gripping the logs of the pyre. But as the flames flickered again, the image disappeared. There was nothing there. Only Nibaran Babu's body and the burning wood remained. Later, Grandfather would often say, "Perhaps it was just an illusion. Firelight can make people see many strange things." Everyone sat in a circle around the pyre. Suddenly, one of the younger men in the group, Samir, screamed. He pointed toward the darkness beyond the cremation ground. Beneath a large peepal tree, someone appeared to be standing. The figure was visible only through the flickering glow of the fire. It was tall. It seemed to be wearing a white dhoti, but its face could not be seen clearly. It looked as though darkness itself had swallowed it. Where its head should have been, there was only a deep black shadow. Everyone became motionless. Then one of the hurricane lanterns suddenly flickered and went out. Darkness engulfed them. In the darkness, all they could hear was the crackling of burning wood from the pyre, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of someone laughing softly. A cold laugh. A laugh that did not sound human. Even in the darkness, Grandfather clearly saw something that froze his blood. The half-open eyes of Nibaran Babu, which had been visible inside the flames, suddenly seemed fully open. The eyes were staring directly at him, without blinking, without moving. Grandfather felt as though Nibaran Babu was trying to sit up from the burning pyre. Bimal Grandpa let out a horrifying scream. "Run! Let's get out of here! That isn't Nibaran Babu anymore. That's something else." His voice cracked with terror. There was no courage left in it, only pure fear, the kind of fear that comes from somewhere ancient and forgotten. His face had turned pale white. He took a step backward, then stopped. Everyone knew one thing. Leaving a half-burned body behind and abandoning a cremation ground was considered a terrible mistake. It was not only considered impure, but also dangerous. According to local beliefs and old stories, doing so could invite dark forces. And once invited, they would never leave a person alone. They would follow them for the rest of their lives. With trembling hands, the men relit the lanterns. Then they moved closer together and sat around the pyre once again. The darkness surrounding them seemed to grow thicker. Every shadow became longer. The shadows overlapped and merged together. It felt as though the cremation ground itself was slowly closing in around them. Like a trap, like something alive. Nobody dared leave another person's side. Fear had bound them together. Some held each other's hands tightly. Some silently prayed. Others moved their lips without making any sound. Everyone could hear the pounding of their own hearts. The night grew deeper. Dawn still felt impossibly far away. Time itself seemed frozen. The fire refused to burn properly. The wind had completely stopped. Only the occasional cracking sound from the pyre echoed through the darkness. And from beyond the firelight came faint hints of movement. Something was out there, watching them, waiting. At that moment, everyone understood something. This was no ordinary night. This was a night that would test them. A night that would decide who would survive until sunrise and who would disappear forever into the darkness. No one could tell what time it was anymore. The wristwatch Grandfather had been wearing seemed to have stopped working ever since they entered the cremation ground. The darkness around them had become so thick that it felt almost touchable. The bluish flames of the pyre would suddenly flare up and then weaken again, as if they were about to die out. Everyone sat huddled together around the fire. From time to time, Grandfather quietly chanted the name of God. Then suddenly, one of the young men in the group, Pachu, spoke up. "Shiamalda, I really need to urinate. I can't hold it anymore. I'm just going over there for a moment." Grandfather immediately objected. "No, don't go anywhere. We all stay together beside the fire. Don't leave this spot." But Pachu seemed unable to think clearly. "I can't hold it anymore. I'll be back in a minute." Before anyone could stop him, he switched on his flashlight and walked into the darkness. 10 minutes passed. Pachu did not return. 15 minutes later, they noticed something strange. The beam of Pachu's flashlight was visible near the old well, but it wasn't moving. It remained fixed in one place. Grandfather shouted, "Pachu! Pachu!" There was no answer. A group of 4 or 5 men grabbed their lanterns and flashlights and cautiously moved toward the well. What they found there made their blood run cold. Pachu's flashlight was lying on the ground. But Pachu himself was nowhere to be seen. The black water of the well released a faint mist into the night air. Then suddenly, they heard the sound of a bucket falling deep into the darkness below. But there was no sign of Pachu. A full-grown man could not simply disappear within a few minutes. Terrified, they rushed back toward the pyre. And then something even worse happened. A strange sound came from inside the burning pyre. A low, rough sound. It sounded like someone struggling to breathe. Everyone stared at the fire. The half-burned body of Nibaran Babu appeared to move. A faint sound seemed to be coming from inside the corpse itself. It was weak, distant, almost like the cry of someone trapped very far away. Grandfather listened carefully, and then the voice became clear. From the burning pyre came a broken voice. "Koka, my middle son. Where did you keep my beetle box?" Every person present shuddered with fear. Nibaran Babu's middle son was standing beside the pyre, trembling violently. Suddenly, he broke down crying. "Father, your beetle box is safe. I left it inside your cupboard at home. Please, please rest in peace." For a moment, there was silence. Then the voice spoke again, but this time it was no longer Nibaran Babu's voice. The sound became deeper, darker. Something inhuman had entered it. The voice growled from within the flames. "None of you will return home tonight. All of you will become part of these ashes forever." A wave of terror swept through the group. Then they noticed something in the darkness. Small balls of light had begun appearing around the cremation ground, like ghostly flames floating in the air. One by one, they emerged from the darkness, slowly moving closer, closer, closer. Bimal Grandpa suddenly cried out, "Shaimal, where is the Dom?" Everyone looked toward the place where the old Dom had been sitting. He was gone. There was nobody there. Only the remains of his burning bidi still glowed faintly on the ground. And beside it lay an old garland made of bones. Grandfather felt a chill spread through his entire body. This was no ordinary cremation ground. Every tree, every stone, every shadow seemed alive, as though the place itself wanted them dead. The men stood shoulder to shoulder around the pyre. Then, without warning, the flames exploded upward. A deafening sound burst from the fire. The blaze became so bright that everyone was temporarily blinded. For several seconds, they could see nothing. Smoke and fire filled the air. When Grandfather finally lowered his hands from his eyes and looked back toward the pyre, his heart nearly stopped. The wooden logs were still burning. The fire was still there. But Nibaran Babu's body was gone. Completely gone. The burning corpse that had been lying on the pyre only moments before had vanished. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Nibaran Babu's youngest son screamed, "Father! Father! Where are you?" The men immediately began searching with their flashlights. The ashes on the ground seemed to swirl by themselves, like tiny whirlwinds. Then one of the men pointed. Everyone turned their lights in the same direction. And there, several feet away from the pyre, lying face down on the ground, was the half-burned body of Nibaran Babu. The sight froze everyone in place. For several moments, nobody dared move. Only the crackling of burning wood echoed through the cremation ground. And somewhere beyond the darkness, something seemed to be watching them. Despite their fear, the men gathered their courage and slowly approached the body. Nibaran Babu's half-burned corpse was lifted once again and placed back onto the funeral pyre. The body felt unbelievably heavy. While carrying it, almost everyone suffered minor burns from the heat. Their skin burned and stung, but nobody let go. Deep inside, they all felt the same thing. Until this cremation was completed, none of them would be free. As they lifted the body, Abhinash Babu himself took hold of one of his father's arms. Grandfather noticed that both of Abhinash Babu's hands were trembling violently. Then suddenly Abhinash Babu screamed. He jerked backward and released the arm immediately. Grandfather rushed toward him. "What happened, Abhinash Da?" Abhinash Babu stared at his palm with a pale face. There was no burn mark on it. Yet a dark black stain had appeared on the center of his hand. In a trembling voice, he whispered, "Shamal." When I grabbed my father's hand, it didn't feel like the hand of a dead man. He swallowed hard, then continued. It grabbed my wrist. Everyone froze. Abanash Babu looked horrified. It held my wrist exactly the way father used to hold my hand when he took me to school as a child. The words sent a chill through everyone present. Abanash Babu had always been known as a calm and rational man. He worked in a respected government office in Kolkata. He believed strongly in logic and science. Even earlier that evening, he had tried to reassure everyone. On the way to the cremation ground, he had said, "Why are all of you thinking such foolish things? Father lived a long life. After death, the human body becomes nothing more than matter. A mouth opening after death or muscles twitching are natural physical reactions. There is nothing supernatural about it." But now things had changed. Pachu had disappeared. The body had vanished from the pyre. And now the corpse had seemingly grabbed his hand. For the first time that night, Abanash Babu's confidence in logic began to crumble. A terrible question entered his mind. Had his father truly found peace, or was something keeping him trapped? At that moment, Abanash Babu was no longer a government officer. He was no longer a rational thinker. He was simply a son standing in the darkness, searching for his father. The flames danced across his face. There was no fear in his eyes now, only sadness and longing. Slowly, he stepped closer to the pyre. Everyone assumed he was about to offer one final prayer. But then he spoke. "Father, why are you calling for my middle brother? I am your eldest son. I am right here beside you. Please leave him alone." Suddenly, Abanash Babu turned and began walking toward the large peepal tree where the shadowy figure had been seen earlier. Grandfather immediately shouted, "Abanash Da, where are you going? Don't leave the fire." But Abanash Babu kept walking. Without turning around, he replied, "Father is standing over there, Shayamal. He wants to tell me something. I think I am already too late." The men quickly shined their flashlights toward the tree. There was nobody there, only twisted shadows moving among the branches. Yet Abanash Babu continued forward. His movements seemed unnatural, as though he were under some kind of spell. Then, just as he approached the darkness beneath the tree, something emerged from the bushes. It was the old Dom, the same Dom who had mysteriously disappeared earlier. He burst through the undergrowth, carrying an old iron chain in his hand. His voice echoed across the cremation ground. "Stop him! Don't let him enter that shadow! If he steps beneath that tree, he will never come back." Grandfather and Heron Grandpa immediately ran forward. They grabbed Abanash Babu from behind. But what happened next shocked them. Abanash Babu suddenly displayed incredible strength. With a single violent movement, he threw both men aside. Grandfather hit the ground hard. When he looked up again, his blood turned cold. Abanash Babu's eyes had changed. The white part of his eyes was gone. The pupils were gone. Both eyes had become completely black, dark, empty, like two holes leading into endless darkness. Then Abanash Babu smiled, and for a brief second, his teeth appeared unnaturally long and sharp. The old Dom immediately slammed the iron chain against the ground. Clang! The metallic sound echoed through the cremation ground. Abanash Babu froze instantly. The Dom grabbed a handful of burnt soil and threw it toward him while chanting something under his breath. The words could not be understood, but the effect was immediate. Abanash Babu's body suddenly collapsed. He fell unconscious onto the ground. The old Dom turned toward the terrified men. His face was serious. His voice was low. "Tonight is a very difficult night, Babus. He does not wish to leave. And the old residents of this cremation ground are using his grief for their own purpose. Whatever happens, do not leave the circle of the pyre." The men carried Abanash Babu back to the fire. His forehead was covered in sweat. His breathing was shallow. As Grandfather looked at the Dom, a strange feeling crept into his mind. In the lantern light, he could clearly see the old man's face. He could see his body. But somehow, his feet remained hidden inside the shadows. It was impossible to tell exactly where he was standing. And for a brief moment, Grandfather wondered, was the Dom truly a living man? Or was he something else entirely? The horrifying moments beside the pyre seemed endless. None of them had any sense of time anymore. A strange and crushing silence settled over the cremation ground. Grandfather noticed something unusual. The fire was no longer burning normally. The flames appeared to rise for a moment and then bend downward as if they were striking an invisible wall. There was no wind at all, yet the leaves of the enormous peepal tree continued to tremble violently. It looked as though some unseen force was shaking the tree from above. Among all of them, Nibaran Babu's middle son was in the worst condition. He had arrived from Asansol only that evening. Now he could not take his eyes off the pyre. Again and again he whispered to himself. Suddenly he screamed and tried to run toward the flames. Grandfather and Harren Grandpa grabbed him immediately. The man struggled wildly. Tears streamed down his face. "Father is calling me. Look, he is reaching out his hand from inside the fire. He says he is suffering." Grandfather looked carefully toward the pyre, but he saw nothing except flames and burning wood. Then suddenly, a heavy splash echoed from the direction of the old well. It sounded as though a huge stone had fallen deep into the water. Everyone turned. The mist above the well had grown thicker. It twisted upward like a living thing. And from within that mist, a pair of glowing eyes slowly emerged. They were not the eyes of an animal, nor did they belong to a bird. They looked disturbingly human. The pupils glowed red like burning coals. Those eyes stared directly at them. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then, without warning, a large burning log exploded from the pyre and landed among them. The shower of sparks snapped everyone out of their trance. Grandfather quickly pulled out his bunch of keys and began shaking them loudly. The elders always said that the sound of iron could drive away evil forces. Amazingly, the glowing eyes began to fade, slowly, gradually, until they disappeared completely into the mist. But the danger was far from over. Soon, strange noises began coming from the bushes surrounding the cremation ground. It sounded as if hundreds of people were walking through the darkness. Branches snapped, leaves rustled, whispers drifted through the air. And every now and then came bursts of unnatural laughter. The bravest member of their group was a young man named Samir. Even he began to cry. In a trembling voice, he whispered, "Shiamalda, they have surrounded us." Then came a scream. A terrible scream. It sounded exactly like Pachu. Everyone instinctively pointed their flashlights upward. The beam struck the branches of a nearby tree, and what they saw made their blood freeze. Pachu was hanging upside down from a thick branch. His legs were wrapped around the tree. His head hung toward the ground. His eyes had turned completely white. Harren Grandpa shouted, "Pachu, how did you get up there? Grab a branch and climb down." But Pachu gave no reply. He only continued screaming. Then something emerged behind him, a black hand. A long, unnaturally dark hand reached out from the trunk of the tree itself. The fingers wrapped around Pachu's throat. The scream stopped instantly. Silence, a horrifying silence. Then something impossible happened. Pachu's body did not fall. Instead, it slowly began to merge with the tree, as if the wood were swallowing him. Grandfather suddenly understood. That was not really Pachu. It was an illusion, a trap. Something was trying to lure them toward the tree. Drawing upon every bit of courage he had left, Grandfather shouted at the top of his lungs, "Bol Hari Hari Bol." The others immediately joined him. "Bol Hari Hari Bol! Bol Hari Hari Bol!" As the sacred chant echoed across the cremation ground, the image above them began to blur. Within moments, it disappeared completely. There was no Pachu, no black hand, nothing. Only empty branches swaying in the darkness. But the night still had one final terror waiting for them. As the cremation neared its end, an extraordinary sight appeared above the pyre. The smoke rising from the flames began to gather together. It thickened, twisted, and slowly formed the shape of a giant human figure. The figure resembled Nibaran Babu. It towered over everyone present, looking down upon them. Abhinash Babu was still unconscious, yet his lips continued moving. He kept muttering the same words again and again. "The beetle box, the betel box, everything I saved is inside that box." Grandfather suddenly realized something. Perhaps Nibaran Babu had been trying to tell his middle son something important. A secret, a final message, maybe even the location of some family property. And perhaps that unfinished desire had trapped his spirit between worlds. Then, at long last, the darkness began to weaken. A faint gray light appeared along the horizon. Dawn was coming. And as the first signs of morning touched the sky, the horrifying sounds around the cremation ground slowly faded away. The whispers stopped, the laughter vanished, the shadows retreated. The nightmare was finally beginning to end.
As the first light of dawn spread across the horizon, the nightmare finally began to loosen its grip on the cremation ground. The horrifying sounds that had surrounded them throughout the night gradually disappeared. The whispers were gone. The strange laughter faded into silence. Even the oppressive darkness seemed to retreat. Then they saw something astonishing. Near the old well, Pachu was lying unconscious on the ground. He was alive. No one could explain how he had survived. The men rushed toward him and carefully lifted him onto their shoulders. As they did, Grandfather noticed that Abanash Babu had finally regained consciousness. He sat quietly beside the dying embers of the pyre. Something about him seemed different now. His face was pale. His eyes looked distant. He did not speak. He simply stared into the ashes. Grandfather followed his gaze. The pyre had nearly burned out. Only white ash remained. Among the ashes lay fragments of Nabaran Babu's bones. Nothing more. When they finally left the cremation ground, Grandfather never once looked back. Yet he could still feel it. The ancient peepal tree, the old well. It felt as though both were still watching, still waiting, searching for someone. As they approached the first signs of civilization, the sun slowly rose above the horizon. The group immediately went to the Ganges and bathed in its waters to purify themselves. Nobody spoke much that day. Everyone seemed eager to forget what had happened. But some things can never truly be forgotten. Before leaving for Asansol, Nabaran Babu's middle son pulled Grandfather aside. His face was serious. His eyes were filled with emotion. He said quietly, "Shamalda, this morning, after returning from the cremation ground, I opened Father's cupboard and took out the beetle box. I thought perhaps it contained gold, money, or some hidden treasure. But I was wrong." Grandfather listened silently. The man continued, "There was only a letter. A letter hidden inside a secret compartment at the bottom of the box." Grandfather asked, "What did it say?" The man looked away for a moment. Then he smiled sadly. "It said that the greatest treasure a family can possess is unity." That was Father's final message. For a long time, neither man spoke. The terrifying events of that night had shaken everyone. Yet, in the end, the message left behind by Nabaran Babu was not one of fear. It was one of love, of family, of togetherness. But even after all these years, the memories of that night never truly faded. The black mark that appeared on Abanash Babu's palm remained there for the rest of his life. Grandfather himself never again felt comfortable walking outside alone at night, and he completely avoided that road leading to the cremation ground. Whenever someone asked him why, he would simply say, "Science cannot explain everything. What we experienced that night was real." According to Grandfather, Nabaran Babu did not merely frighten them. He taught them something. He showed them that not every corner of this world belongs to human beings. Some places belong to something else, something older, something we may never fully understand. And then there was the Dom. Many people believe that some Doms never truly leave the cremation grounds, even after death. Their lives become so deeply connected to fire, ashes, and bones that death itself cannot separate them from their duty. They spend their lives guiding others on their final journey, and perhaps even after death, they continue that responsibility. Grandfather often said that when he looked into the Dom's eyes that night, he saw something strange. There was no exhaustion, no sign of age, no weakness.
It was as though the man had existed there forever, watching, waiting, protecting the boundary between the living and the dead. And sometimes, on moonless nights, when the wind moves through the trees around that old cremation ground, people still claim to hear distant footsteps, the crackling of an unseen fire, and the faint sound of an old man whispering from the darkness. Whether those stories are true or not, no one can say. But one thing is certain: no one who survived that night ever forgot it. And neither will I. Thank you for listening to today's story. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with the channel. Leave a comment below and let me know what you thought of this story. On a fear scale from 1 to 10, how would you rate it? Share this episode with your friends. Until next time, stay safe, stay blessed, and good night.